talk all about yeast from the Beer for Dummies book. Stay with us. So in the book, it's page 21, and it's called Yeast. A fungus is among us. So funny. So yeast works hard, but really enjoys itself, like me most of the time. This little single cell organism, one of the simplest forms of plant life, is responsible for carrying out the fermentation process in beer making, thereby providing one of life's simplest forms of pleasure. And its production of carbon dioxide is what causes bread dough to rise. So you've got bread rising, and of course, you've got all the carbonation that you enjoy when you drink a beer. Many brewers consider their yeast to be their most secret ingredient and often guard its identity jealously, calling it a proprietary ingredient. Yeast is in the fungus family, and because of its cell-splitting capabilities, is self-reproducing. Yeast has a vicarious appetite for sweet liquids and produces abundant qualities of alcohol called ethanol and carbon dioxide in exchange for a good meal, which means that yeast is also responsible for producing the brain-splitting headaches if you drink too much. So it's the yeast that brings us pleasure from drinking beer, and it's also the yeast that gives us a headache in the noggin. Since the late 1800s, numerous pure yeast strains, more than 500 different types, have been isolated, identified, and cultured. Commercial yeast banks inventory these strains in the form of sterile saints or test tubes, and some individual breweries keep their own sterile cultures on hand for future brews. So let's talk a little bit about yeast ales, ale yeast compared to lager yeast. Ale yeast, which is a top fermenting yeast, works best in warm temperatures, 60 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Lager yeasts, on the other hand, are bottom fermenting yeasts, and they perform best in cooler temperatures, usually 38 to 52 degrees Fahrenheit. Because of the temperature differential, each yeast strain produces the vastly different flavor and aroma characteristics that in turn create the different beer styles that you know, love, and drink. Yeast, in combination with different fermentation processes, can also contribute fruitiness and other flavor characteristics to the beer. Brewmasters try to keep these flavors in check depending on which beer style they're brewing. So you know what? Beer heavily depends on a good yeast strain for its characteristics, its flavor, sometimes the fruitiness, and without it, we wouldn't have the carbonation and we wouldn't have the flavor of a good beer.